So back in the beginning of the pandemic, I really wasn't even coming to this studio at all. I was like everybody else, sort of locked down in my own apartment. Made my obligatory "ça va bien aller" rainbow. But in that time, I was working in just the tiniest, like 2 square foot kind of desk in my kitchen, and started doing some drawings in ink. These were crowberry inks that I'd foraged in Newfoundland the year before, and I had a small box of things that I'd collected on the trip that I'd taken last before the pandemic, which was to the West Coast. I was doing a show in Victoria, and started just drawing these little objects. These are of fanciful colors. They were kind of later on when I was beginning to feel so constrained by just sort of all of the circumstances. But they began pretty realistic, just these little bits and pieces of the trail and of the beaches that I'd picked up. But I found even drawing them really kind of transported me back, and made me feel a little bit less trapped in the apartment. And then this developed into a project that was funded by the Canada Council Digital Originals Grant. So this is going to become a Prezi-based website, basically, that's just sort of a stroll through a lot of the objects and images that I've collected over the years in kind of a cabinet of curiosity style hodgepodge of narratives and images. Um, so yeah, that will be available online quite soon. The cabinet of curiosity has always been probably the most apt metaphor for my practice as a whole. So yes, I collect things, but I'm also totally fascinated by other people's collections, whether they just be like personal altars in the home or like grand institutional collections, such as we see in the world's great museums. I've tackled it once or twice directly as work. So this installation, for instance, was part of a larger show using the very museum-like vitrines of the Fofa Gallery at Concordia University, where I did my MFA. So the mural is based on one of the first representations of a cabinet of curiosity in the Western Record. I recreated it in India ink on the wall, freehand, and overlaid a whole bunch of just like stuff from my studio, both bits and pieces of artworks of my own, which had largely not been seen yet, and things that had come my way over the years. So everything I physically put into the space had a referent in the original engraving. For instance, I retooled the bookshelves in the image, creating my own shelf of quote-unquote canonical knowledge, and challenging the established canon has always been something like an innate drive for me. As I was contemplating our sort of shelter-in-placeness in the beginning of the quarantine, I realized one of the things I really missed was seeing work in person and walking through the actual spaces of museums. So I started going back through photographs that I'd taken over the years in various museums. This, for instance, is from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, and it's this crazy sort of hodgepodge of things that she liked and found interesting and just sort of curated in a highly personal way. And it's a space and then it's all sort of housed within this big Italianate villa that she built on the banks of the Charles River. And I realized I could transport the viewer of this website to all of these remote places because we're all stuck at home, right? The good and the bad thing about the internet is that it flattens everything. So, for instance, just thinking about images of objects, like anything can end up next to anything else, no matter how much geographical or temporal distance may separate the two items in reality. This is true for books, of course, too, and film, but the difference I feel with the internet is that so much of the time context is stripped away. Like everything becomes both exactly now and also kind of never, because what you're experiencing is mediated by the screen. I think that that's one of the hardest things about viewing art through the computer during a pandemic and a quarantine. It's like that flattening effect. So I guess I'm deciding to work with that instead of against it. I've collected hundreds of bits and pieces of the world, as well as thousands of images from museums and collections across the world. And most of these things could never get to sit side by side in real life. Many of them are housed behind the IRL paywall that is a museum admission fee. So my idea was that I could just sort of free all of this up, at least the things which I've personally witnessed and photographed over the years, and make my own virtual museum of the memories of these like vastly far-flung things, some of which have been ascribed tremendous value, and some of which, in a world of quote-unquote capital, have none. And this museum would put them all sort of side by side, and it would be obviously free to anybody.